Okay. Hello, we're pushing on into the Driscoll book again. And yet again flipping through our wonderful syllabus for this class. And so it is. We now turn to opportunities to learn from your brain. A little bit of a shift in emphasis from behavioral theories to cognitive ones. And hopefully it's an area in which you find yourself resonating with a bit more than other areas, maybe not. We'll go into a number of theorists here today. Well, I'm just going to walk us through actually information from 3 different weeks of this semester we're going to do in 45 minutes. So hang on, take a tight grip on your mouse or keyboard because this is going to be, well, a bit of a quick tour through some of the very important figures of all time. We're going to cover Piaget and Vygotsky, who were both born in 1896, one dying significantly well before the other. Vygotsky living to age 37, and Piaget living into his 80s. Each clearly had a major impact on education in slightly different ways, and with vastly different amounts of time in which to do that in. We have, Vygotsky, born in Russia, who got into college through luck of a draw, because not many Jewish people were allowed into higher education systems there. Initially he was thinking about areas of law. Also, he was a teacher. Also, he was interested in media, interested in film in some ways, interested in special education. He was a special educator in many ways. His interests were very, very, very diverse. Piaget, on the other hand, interested in biology before becoming a psychologist. I think Skinner was interested in writing before becoming a psychologist. You see many people who shifted fields after having an initial interest in one thing or an initial expertise where they made their mark and then shifting over into something else. But I don't have time in which to cover the history of both individuals, Piaget and Vygotsky, and that would take a fairly long time. I think there is a podcast posted that you could listen to related to this. I will also cover Bruner, Jerome Bruner, who's still alive today, and I'll talk about Robert Gagne, which gets us into instructional theories. Piaget and Vygotsky are learning and development psychologists. Bruner gets us into instructional implications, I think, more than the others in some ways, and Gagne does as well. And so we'll go through each of the 4 here, and again, they relate to different weeks of the syllabus, and I hope it's okay to mesh them together here temporarily just to get a sense of where they're coming from, what their implications are, what their main tenets or principles are, and the implications thereof. So without further ado, let's take a look. Piaget, Vygotsky, Bruner, and Gagne. I have to thank my former postdoc, Sung-Hee Lee, for many of the ideas I'll present in here related to them because they come from her, and so I can't take total credit for these. Now, Piaget was a cognitive development, a Swiss psychologist who influenced many people, including Seymour Papert, who developed many computer-based instructional programs in the U.S. here in the past few decades. You may have heard of Logo or Lego Logo. Well, that comes from studying with Piaget at his institute in Geneva. Piaget helped on some initial intelligence tests at the Binet Institute. He was, as I said, a biologist, interested not only in biology but philosophy. And he tried creating a theoretical framework called genetic epistemology based in naturalistic research, watching his own children grow up. Now, when I adopted my son from Korea, my wife said I could not do any experiments on him, so I didn't. But within a year, he was a question-asking machine, and so I subtly got a few things in that she doesn't know about. Just don't tell her. Piaget's, just kidding. Piaget's viewpoint, he's mostly concerned about K-12. I mean, he studied his own kids. Others are more concerned about adult learners, but typically we see most psychologists focused on children or K-12. That's where the funding is. That's where we see things as being most malleable to actually make changes early in life. He focuses on development, or stages that we walk through, as opposed to learning, being prepared for learning, getting us to that next stage. And he looks at distinctive stages, or phases that we walk on through. That to engage students in learning, they have to construct their own knowledge. They have to explore, manipulate, discover, question, and answer. That we start as potentials. We start with little specialization, but it's our discovery, our explorations in our environments that enable us to push on through, that enable us to have some sense of self-efficacy, like Bandura talked about last time, to have mastery successes, right? But we have things organized in our heads as schemas or schemes that I'll talk about in another week. I'll get into schema theory. New information puts us into a state of disequilibrium. Okay? So we move from a state of equilibrium, where we know things, to being in a state of cognitive dissonance, or having a sense that we don't know something that puts us into disequilibrium, or a sense of imbalance, which forces us to acquire more information. Now, we can acquire that additional information by assimilating it into existing schemas. When we see a chair that is red, chair that we have here, with 4 legs on it, we can assimilate it into our notion of chairness. But when we see a 2-legged chair or a 3-legged chair, we might no longer be able to assimilate that. We might have to accommodate that, or a 3-legged dog, for instance. We might have to accommodate some thing that's new, or a new species. If we see something that no one ever saw before, like a colossal squid or a gigantic squid, a fully new one, we might have to accommodate it because we haven't seen such a species previously. That the colossal squid, by the way, has eyeballs the size of soccer balls and a translucent body, and so forth and so on, found in Antarctic waters. So assimilation is when we can put things in slots that are similar to other slots in our heads, organize them in. We walk through stages from sensorimotor to preoperational to concrete to formal, and I'll let you read about them. I'll only discuss them briefly here, but basically young children, just born, sensorimotor, preoperational, the toddler learning to walk, to concrete operations, early primary school to high school and college formal operations, and later elementary, actually. Processes that we go through: accommodation, assimilation, equilibrium, I mentioned, and the types of knowledge: physical knowledge, motor skills, logical, mathematical, and social knowledge. So the stages of sensorimotor, ages 0 to 2, and there are videos that are in the addendum for this week that can explain these stages and show some Piagetian experiments in action. As you can see, someone moving from preoperational to concrete, filling up jars, water from one container into a tall and skinny container, into a fatter container, a wider container, and asking the child, does this one have more or less? Or spreading coins out that you have on a desk and saying which pile has more in it, the one that was spread out, the one that's closer together, to see if they can, make those observations correctly or not. Piaget makes statements about the ability to use ordering, to use abstract knowledge, to make analogies that are only capable at certain ages or stages, in effect. Now, he always said the American question was, can we push people ahead faster? Of course, that's the American question. We're always pushing faster and faster and faster. He said, we can't push ahead faster. We might get one child to move slightly ahead of another, but that's typically not the case. He said nature and nurture are both important. Knowledge is constructed, not just a copy of reality, and that the environment depends on the child's current stage of development. How we're influenced depends on our current stage. All children pass through the same basic stages, the same developmental changes. It's universal across cultures. So his is a theory of universality. There's little or no variation in child's performance on different domains at each stage of development. Development is uniform. So he said we can teach by providing support for the child that's appropriate to their stage of development, kind of a duh finding, that we need to use active constructivistic techniques to get them into a state of disequilibrium. And when we get that disequilibrium, we can get them seeking in their environments, right? Requiring them to discover new truths. Collaborating with individuals increases the odds of disequilibrium, but he looked at same age peers. Vygotsky looked at different age peers or more expert like others. Devising situations that present problems or disequilibrium is very important to a Piagetian teacher. Vygotsky is similar to Piaget, only Vygotsky, born again the same year, was a Russian psychologist in the midst of a revolution, the Russian Revolution. And he was more concerned on not getting us to a state of equilibrium, but a state of disequilibrium by prodding, probing, nudging students along into seeing other ways of solving a problem, other ways, of attacking an issue or a problem, internalizing the strategies of others. He was more concerned with constructing a general theory of all factors affecting the transmission and learning of knowledge. So he was a generalist in many ways. So he said that learning is a process of internalizing the language and action of others, emphasizing social interaction, but places less emphasis on stages of behavior. Mental processes understood if we understand the tools and signs that mediate them. Okay? No single principle can account for development. So he's a semiotician. Vygotsky looks at the tools and signs in our culture that we see, whether it's a book, whether it's a street sign, whether, whatever it might happen to be. He sees that it's the signage that we internalize, whether we have a watch, a stopwatch, the tools, signs, and so forth in our environment can be internalized. We internalize things. We internalize the problem-solving behaviors we see of others. Okay, we use different things to scaffold or bootstrap us up to enable us to do something we couldn't do previously. That's why think sheets are important, or reflection logs, or job aids are important in helping to get us to do something that we couldn't previously do. Every child's function, developmental function, appears twice, first as an individual and later first on a social plane and later on an individual plane. So first interpsychologically and then intrapsychologically. This applies to voluntary action as well as to higher order actions. In effect, what he's saying is that first we see an action or a procedure with others on an interpsychological plane. We have small group activities, collaborative activities that we can internalize later. We can try it out on our own and internalize those actions as our own problem-solving processes, in effect. Does that make sense? So we have two stages of development. The first stage is an interpsychological, interprocessing with others, and then we appropriate those strategies that might work for us, that might be beneficial for us. We take as our own, not the exact copy of what someone else did, our role model, as Bandura would say. We internalize pieces. We appropriate the parts that are workable for us, and then we try them out. We might self-talk, what Piaget would call egocentric speech. We self-talk, but Vygotsky said it's very important to self-talk. It moves us, it bridges us from that interpsychological plane to an intrapsychological one. So we scaffold through working with others, through think sheets, through prompting and probing. We provide, scaffolding is an instructional technique that provides that support. It provides that basic structure that can gradually be reduced or withdrawn. We push kids into their edges of their competence, in effect. We nudge them within their zones of proximal development. It's figuring out those zones. It's figuring out where the students are at. That's critical. what ZPD, or zone of proximal development, one student has might be vastly different from another. And so while one student can solve 10 algebra problems out of 20 correct, sitting to my right, and another student to my left can solve 10 out of 20 as well, which of those two students is smarter? Which of those two students is potentially able to solve all 20? Well, the one on my right, I only have to give some general hints. I give him a little sheet of some general hints to, and she solves them all correctly. The student on my left, I have to go and help over and over again, giving advice and aids and scaffolds and so forth, and almost give the answer away. That student's zone of proximal development is quite a bit thinner than the one who's ready to move into that next level of development with just a little bit of support. Okay? So we have these ZPDs, or zones of proximal development, that we each have, and we gradually support and figure out the degrees of support each student needs. We might question them, nudge them, push them to explore, give some task structuring. In my own research online, we've come up with 12 ways to scaffold learning online. Models are hard to do online. It's hard to do that, but we can give examples from previous semesters and archive work, or film ourselves like I'm doing here today. Questioning is much easier. Acknowledging points of view, much easier. Pushing to explore, right? So we've got levels of development. We have our present stage of development and our potential stage. It's in between there that's our ZPD. We want to push and probe within that difference between the fossilized intelligence, our present stage of development, and our potential stage. We want to push people from where they are today to where they can be. Okay? He said, Americans, you look too much at existing skills, what he calls fossilized skills with your SAT scores and GREs. What's more important is to look at what students can do collaboratively with others. What they can do with help from a job aid or a peer or a teacher or tutor. It's that zone in between what you can do independently and what you can do with the help of others. That's the important place to look. It's there where learning is exciting. It's there where learning is optimistic, because now computers, little think sheets, whatever tools and signs in our culture can all nudge people along to their next stage of development. That's why the Web 2.0 is powerful. We're learning in communities with others. That's why computers can be powerful as an additional tutor or aid. That's why resources in general are important. And that's why Vygotsky's theory is both an optimistic as well as a pessimistic one. Right? It's one wherein we've got the chance to help any student learn with resources, but if you don't have resources, what can you do? And it's why today, with learning being open access resources, open education, which my colleagues Mimi Lee at Houston and Grace Lynn at Hawaii and myself and others are looking at, wikis and wikibooks in this class and other things. It's because we're opening up learning to be more accessible for all learners. The resources of learning are exploding for everyone. And in effect, Vygotsky's theory is more alive and well today than when he was alive 70, 80 years ago, right? It's unfortunate that he died early, because it would be interesting to see today what he would think about all the possibilities to push people ahead within their zones of proximal development. So we can do things alone without help, some things with support, some things we can't even with support. We have our zones of proximal development. And, our capacity is facilitated by experts, peers, coaches, teachers, parents, everybody, even self-reinforcement, self-help, moves us from stage 1 to stage 2 to stage 3, okay? Moves us along and rouses minds to life, as Tharp and Gallimore talk about. We move to the edge of our envelope from what we can do with no help to what we can do with the help of others, and eventually we move through an apprenticeship, a cognitive apprenticeship, beyond what most GREs and SATs would give us credit for being able to do. So the human mind is a product of culture, history. The tools in our culture can help scaffold us along. The transmission of cultural tools are essential for cognitive development. Knowledge is at the same time constructed and co-constructed with others on a social plane and gradually internalized. Successful instruction is to match it to our ZPD. Processes of developmental change are culturally specific, not universal. Unlike Piaget that said things are universal, and most behaviorists would as well. Development is not uniform, not domain general, but it's more specific than that. And it depends on our areas of expertise. So instruction, in turn, should precede development, nudge it along, push it along. It's our social partners and the people you picked in your respective graduate programs to work with. Who are your colleagues when you write a paper together? Those are the people that are nudging and pushing and probing you along, that impact on your thinking, that in turn help you become a better psychologist or writer or whatever your area of expertise is. It's those people out there, those social partners you have, that impact your development, and in turn you can impact theirs. Instruction should provide learners with authentic or near authentic learning situations, whether it's simulations or cases or real-world experiences. Problem-based learning, problem solving, product-based learning, task-based learning. Language is essential to thinking. Thinking aloud is helpful for learning. Our third theorist that we're talking about today is Bruner, and I should talk about him briefly. So we've covered Piaget and Vygotsky. Piaget is saying development is more important than learning. We have to think about whether we're developmentally ready for an activity. Vygotsky is saying we can prompt and probe and push people ahead, okay, through learning. He's a developmentalist per se, but he believed learning could nudge people along. We could push people beyond what you think they might be capable of doing. Okay, learning precedes development. We need learning. We need to get people into their areas of uncomfort. Their uncomfort zones, not their comfort zones, beyond where they are. Bruner's a combination of the both of them. In fact, in 1996, he gave a speech commemorating their 100-year anniversary. Went back to Switzerland, I believe, and I had a student tape record it, and we listened to it in class. So stages are not necessarily age-dependent or invariant. Assumptions are the outcome of cognitive development is thinking. Cognitive growth involves interaction between human capabilities and culturally invented technologies that serve as amplifiers. The aim of education should be creating autonomous learners, learning to learn. That instruction be concerned with the experiences and contexts that make the student willing and able to learn. Readiness. Instruction should be structured. That it should be a spiral nature. That we're constantly cycling back in over and over and gradually moving up and coming back to what we know and moving up and advancing up and up and up. Right, that's life. Instruction should be designed to facilitate extrapolation and to fill in the gaps. What don't you know? Going beyond the information given. Again, kind of similar to this notion of disequilibrium, right? There is no sequence for all learners, and the optimum in any particular case will depend upon a variety of factors, including past learning, stage of development, type of material, and individual differences. His book, Actual Worlds, Possible Minds, is one. There are many other books by Bruner that people read in graduate school for their qualifying examinations. And so you might read from Bruner. I had a chance to meet him at the AERA conference, about American Education Research Association conference, about 12, maybe 15 years ago. Brilliant man. 3 modes of representation. In active stage, knowledge is stored primarily in the form of motor responses. Iconic stage, we store it in the form of visual images. In symbolic stage, storing things in symbols, in symbol systems. Implications for instruction. Any subject matter can be taught in a way that's intellectually honest form to any child at any stage of development. You know, if you've got Happy Meals, and, you know, back in the day when Happy Meals were important, you could do things mathematically with kids that Piagetians said you couldn't do. You could make analogies with young kids using Happy Meals because kids were familiar with it. It was an intellectually honest way to learn. Most Piagetian experiments in math and science were at well over what kids, you know, young kids had exposure to, and therefore many times they couldn't do them just because they didn't know about them. Subject matter must be made ready for children. and the instructional challenge is to provide problems that both fit the manner of the child's thinking and tempt more powerful thinking. The notion of spiral curriculum embeds ideas of moving through topics at every age, but consistent with child's development of thought. Discovery is not just an instructional technique, but is important to learning. He believes in discovery learning and guided discovery learning, which in many ways, Bruner's ideas of guided discovery learning are potentially where we're at today as a culture. We're looking at learner-centered learning, problem-based learning, problem solving. Really, it's about Bruner. In the 60s and 70s, it was about open classrooms, which kind of failed. They took his open classroom ideas and misapplied them. It wasn't just about breaking down walls and taking out these barriers behind and so forth, and opening up the classes so you could hear other classes. It was opening up minds to learn, in effect. Okay, let's compare some of these people like Piaget and Vygotsky before getting to end with Robert Gagne. So let's compare a bit. There's Piaget on the left, Vygotsky on the right. Okay, Piaget or Vygotsky, mind grows out of society, societal relations, mind is in the head. Who said that? Mind is in your head. Piaget said that, of course. Well, then who said mind is society? That the mind extends beyond your skin. Your mind is in your social networks. It extends beyond this little skin in your head out there. Well, of course, then that would be Vygotsky. Good answer, everybody. Who said the unit of analysis is cognitive development of individuals? Aha. Piaget, you're right. And who said the unit of analysis should be the word meaning, the activity plane? Vygotsky. Very good. Everyone's smart in this class. Okay, Piaget or Vygotsky, the focus is on the role of culture in the development of higher mental functioning. Who looked at social collaboration and culture and history and the cultural tools? And that was Vygotsky, right? And who looked at who focused on the growth of intelligence from an infant to adult with his 4 stages? You're right, it was Piaget. Individual development depends on social cultural setting, teacher, community, guided participation in the culture, communities of practice, communities of learning. Yeah, it was Vygotsky. This is a smart group. And who said individuals go through universal, qualitative stages that are individually centered? We all go through same 4 stages. Piaget. Who said development is biological or innatist, that we are pre-programmed to conceptualize number? Who's the biologist? Piaget. Who said that development is both social and biological, that the external plane is important, and was influenced by other Russian psychologists like Pavlov, and understood the notion of external cues being important in the social milieu? Vygotsky. And who said learning precedes development? Note, this is a big one, so do not get this wrong. Precedes. Learning comes before. Vygotsky. I just talked about that. Who said learning trails development? Well, we left with one person, and that's Piaget. So he said we have to wait for development to catch up before we can do some learning, right? Development is internal adaptation from disequilibrium. Disequilibrium, that sounds like Piaget. So development is internal adaptation to disequilibrium. Who said it? No, well, wait a minute. Development moves from internal to external. It appears twice, first socially and then intrapsychologically. Vygotsky, right. Speech is used as a bridge from external to internal. It's an entry point into social interaction. Vygotsky said that. We move from that collaborative team, from our social encounters, to working with other people. So we move from that interpsychological plane to an intrapsychological. And that speech is one way to talk ourselves through that movement. Speech reflects development. Speech and thought are complementary. Okay? It's not a bridge. That would be Piaget. Egocentric speech is for oneself. It disappears with socialization. It's not important. So when you talk to yourself, and you're mumbling to yourself, this person said it's not important, and that was Piaget. Whereas the other person, Vygotsky, said inner speech is egocentric speech gone inward for self-regulation. It is crucial to development. It's metacognitive in nature. It helps us monitor our actions. Right. You got it, Vygotsky. Social factors are given low consideration in his research agenda. And that was Piaget, although in many ways his contemporaries said that Piaget just didn't have time, that he was so focused on other things, that social was important, and he wrote about it. He just didn't have a lot of time to get into that. Social interaction is given high priority, would then be Vygotsky. Social interaction develops new patterns of thought and strategic behaviors, Vygotsky. And then, of course, then Piaget would say social interaction leads to confrontation and contradiction and resolution and cognitive change. So while Vygotsky talks about social interaction developing new patterns, it's really the crux of his theory. You know, it's a part of Piaget, but it's not the crux of Piaget. Social interaction with peers and reciprocal collaborative activities is most effective. Same age peers as Piaget, but different age or different expertise, different levels of competence is more important to Vygotsky. That more capable peers, more capable others, even computers that have schemes in them or artificial intelligent agents that can help you out and find information, can lead you to higher levels of CPD. Focus on apprenticeship for learning and new skills and ability. Apprenticeship, that sounds like Vygotsky, whereas cooperative problem solving sounds like Piaget. Change in perspective, so seeing other points of view. Students constructing knowledge, personal cognitive constructivism. Students out on the periphery doing things on their own. To me, that sounds like Piaget, and I'm right. Teachers helping, a community-based helping, experts coming in, social constructivism, that would be Vygotsky. So in effect, what we see here is that there's a term, cognitive constructivism. That means the individual student is an agent constructing on the individual plane, whereas social constructivism gets at a community of learners, gets at others impacting on us. Learning is viewed as theory change. That sounds like Piaget. Learning is viewed as being able to consciously articulate a theory, words, activities, Vygotsky. Culture and individual are mutually constitutive. Socially, historical interaction determines development. That sure sounds like Vygotsky, and you're right. Cultural and individual are separable. Social only influences inevitable development. Social is important, but it's inevitable development coming as Piaget. Number 17, laws of development are universal. We can't do something until proper developmental level. We can't do something, can't do something, can't do it, Piaget. You can do, you can push, you can probe, you can prompt. That would be Vygotsky, right? Laws of development are culturally constructed. Look at the social and institutional structure and change it. Change, oh, sounds like a political thing I'm hearing over and over in the last 2 weeks' conventions here in the U.S. Change, we want change, we want change. I want transformative change. I don't want just change. So look at the institutional structure that is there and change it. Act on it. An optimistic view of learning, Vygotsky. Social interaction may influence cognitive development. Both. Ha, trick question. May. The word may. They both said may. Vygotsky said it will, actually. Individuals are active learners. Both. Emphasis on guided learning and peer interaction. Both. Though more Vygotsky. A cognitive developmental viewpoint. Both, though more so on Piaget. Ignore the social world and tools. Piaget, a common problem of most developmental theories. Most developmental theories try and explain too much, and most psychological theories, so for something has to be ignored, the social historical tools and cultural norms and symbols and so forth. Transfer to life, real life, is lacking. Piaget, somewhat, a common problem of most developmental theories. Emphasis on just the facts, Jack. Piaget, a common problem of most learning and developmental theories. Although, to give him credit, Piaget is also, of course, concerned about problem solving. It just says emphasis on facts. One-to-one, not one-to-many, or not many-to-many situations. Basically saying that this research was done mostly in one-to-one, parent to student. Piaget, somewhat Vygotsky as well, a common problem of most learning and developmental theories. Adult-initiated, Vygotsky and Piaget, a common problem of most learning and development theories. So adults, in effect, prompting, probing, studying, in effect. Investigator defines the activity. Criticism of many theories, almost all theories. Too short of a time frame. More Piaget of a problem and a common problem of theories that we just can't look over, many acts, many activities, and so forth. How does Bonk, who does, it says how does, but who does Bonk like the most? Vygotsky. It's my dissertation. And who would be older today if still alive? And how old would he be? And that would that he would be both. They'd both be 106 years old, Piaget and Vygotsky, one a few months older than the other. And you'll have to look up which is which. Some implications. For Vygotsky, anyhow, adjusting the task to appropriately challenging level, tailoring your teaching and assistance to the child's needs, fostering intersubjectivity between students. Part 5, with help from my friend Sung-Hee Lee. Gagne. Gagne said, let's look at instructional impacts of all these theories. Let's look at the types of learning that are possible, the events of learning, and the hierarchies of learning. He said, let's create a taxonomy of all the learning events out there, all the ways in which we can learn, and all the conditions under which we can learn, and all the outcomes that are important to that learning. And so he found signal learning. The learning associates an already available response with a new stimulus, just like Pavlov. Stimulus response learning, just like Skinner. And chaining learning, just like Skinner. And verbal associations, and concept learning, and rule learning, and problem solving, and all sorts of typical kinds of learning conditions. And then he has his learning outcomes. We might want motor skills to be able to swim the fastest at the Olympics, like Michael Phelps. We might want attitudes to change, that we get students to love learning. Or we might want cognitive abilities to change so that they can perform well at a particular task. We might want their intellectual skills. We might want their verbal skills. There are certain learning outcomes that we want. Okay? And we have certain events that can set the stage for the learning outcomes that we're seeking to obtain. The first 5 communicate behaviors that occur before the acquisition of information. The last 4 are things that occur after the acquisition of behavior. Labels serve to help teachers, to help in the learning environment, to set the stage. And that's why a lot of people have taken Gagne to heart, who was initially a behaviorist during World War II. And Gagne started off, helping out with getting people ready for the war, for World War II, with, quickly skilling them up to get them ready to go off to battle and so forth. And so we see a behavioral influence of, pretty rigid requirements and pretty patented sequences. And later on, he became more of a cognitivist. And when I met him a couple times towards the end of his life, he had tinkered with, thought about constructivism and cognitive apprenticeship and other things. I snuck into the AECT conference in Nashville, Tennessee in '94 and pretended to be a graduate student, even though I had finished my degree 5 years earlier. And it was a special graduate student session, and I was able to ask some questions. So instructional events, from gaining attention, informing learners of objectives, stimulating recall, presenting content, providing guidance. So we have internal mental functioning that happens at each of those events. Stimulus activates receptors. The informing learner creates expectations. Stimulating recall retrieves information from short-term memory. Presenting content, lets people select and perceive the content they want to focus on. Providing learning guidance helps us store information, and then we elicit performance once it's there. We respond to questions, we get feedback, and we assess our performance based on the feedback. And we keep, we move through from feedback to assessing performance to retention and retrieval later on. So Gagne had these events of instruction. Gaining attention, we might show something. We might snap. We might yell. We might throw Driscoll books at each other. We might, do whatever to get attention. We might blow whistles. We might have happy faces and balls and chains and all sorts of things just to get people excited about what you've got here to share with everybody. So I could take, if I can find it, wherever I brought all my balls and chains and so forth with me today. Do I have one? Well, maybe I forgot them. Maybe somebody stole them. I could take an apple. Okay. And I could eat it while I'm lecturing, getting your attention. I could get my carrots and eat them too, and so forth and so on. And then inform learners of the objective, then stimulate the response or recall by reviewing what you presented. Give definitions, provide guidance, and walk people through, get their performance, having them create examples. I think one of your tasks in here are to create cases, potentially, or problems that you've seen, and solve those cases, and link to the theories to elicit your performance. If you do a Wikibook chapter, it can elicit your performance. If you take the final exam, or midterm, or whatever, we are eliciting performance. So checking examples, providing examples, we score that performance, and then we might have some post-activity, some kind of refresher information. So Gagne's implications: identify the types of learning outcomes you want. Each outcome may require different prerequisite skills, and then we create conditions for that particular outcome to occur. We specify the context, we record the actions, we select the media that might be relevant, we provide the motivators. We might give every student an apple and juggle and so forth. Whatever those motivators are, it could be a bottle of water, it could be $1 million, it could be all sorts of things that we're providing in our environment. So I'm passing out my waters to all my students, and that's my motivator today in this class. What other motivators do I have with me here? I might have a smiley ball, so I'll take my smiley ball and I'll pass that out as my motivator for this particular class. Or it might be just a way to get people's attention, and maybe I can throw it at all of you. Not going to throw this apple, that might hurt. Okay, so we do all that. We might instruct people, provide instruction, and then give a test at the end of that instruction. It could be a short quiz, it could be a longer examination. We could do summative evaluation at the end of our class. It could be formative as we move along within our class. But as you can see, each of these people we discussed today, whether we're talking about Piaget and looking at the developmental stages that one walks through, and our abilities at different ages and different stages to accomplish different tasks, is a powerful theory. It's impacted on us for decades, and it will continue to do so. Or if we look at how learning can be nudged along through working with others in our social environment, okay? And we have our little people out there that we learn with, and we interact with, and we talk to all these little people that we have in our groups, okay? And then gradually we take what we've learned in that social situation and internalize that, right? And so that's an important aspect of all theories. We move from the social to the individual, right? I think we can maybe marry Piaget and Vygotsky. I don't think we want to get them married, but we can take their ideas and sort of mesh them together. And we add in Gagne, who talks about instructional approaches and how we can create an environment through lesson plans and other things. And later on in the semester, we'll be reading from David Merrill and Charlie Regaluth here from IU and others in instructional design camps, right? So we take Vygotsky, Piaget, Gagne, and Bruner, and we look at, Bruner really is that bridging tool. Bruner and Vygotsky, I think, both moving us from theory to instruction. We have Piaget on the far end, more of a theorist, dipping his toes in instructional implications and active learning. We got people like Bruner and Vygotsky who get us more into that instructional side of the fence and get us to think about implications of all these theories and how we can help learners proceed and move through more successfully, maybe faster. And then Gagne, who really speaks to teachers, and I think Vygotsky too, speaks to teachers and how we can design environments for learning to occur. Piaget as a cognitive constructivist, Vygotsky as a social constructivist, Bruner, I'm not sure, in between. Gagne was constantly shifting. I'm more in the Vygotsky camp, but maybe a shifty person as well. We don't know. Anyhow, I'm glad you had a chance to sit through this particular talk on these famous people, Piaget, Vygotsky, Bruner, and our fine little teacher friend, the apple, Gagne. Hopefully you can use some of the ideas from each of these four famous theorists in your own classes. I want to thank you for coming. Feel free to send me emails, cjbonk@indiana.edu. Again, find my website and other videos on this series from the Driscoll book. Hopefully you're sticking along with the syllabus and staying on task. We're moving on through this class. It's halfway through, quarter of the way through. Great. Thank you very much. Enjoy Driscoll, everybody.